Hello and welcome to InnoGrid TV in association with Engerati. Frauke Thies joins us now from the Smart Energy Demand Coalition, where you are Executive Director. Frauke, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Much of this conference, perhaps the very reason for this event, is thinking about the clean energy package and ways of actually achieving the underlying goals within it. And one of those is prosumers. So from the SEDC perspective, what's your take on progress that's being made towards that goal of integrating the prosumer truly in the energy market?
In a way, the package is the first time ever, I'd say, in European legislation that the consumer is recognized as an active player in the energy system. And I think in that sense, the package establishes a couple of very, very important principles to enable consumers to play an active role. And thereby really benefit the system big time by providing flexibility, by bringing down costs, and by saving money themselves. And then can take different shapes. But in principle, I'd say the package opens three big doors. One is to give consumers the right to choose a real-time pricing signal, to actually see what's going on in the market. Secondly, it opens all the markets to enable consumers to sell their flexibility explicitly, as we say, either if they're very large consumers directly or more commonly via an aggregator who helps them identify, activate and sell the flexibility resources they may have. And thirdly, to allow consumers to become generators, prosumers themselves, either as individuals or within energy communities. So I think these are the three principles in general that the package allows, and I'm happy to give more detail on.
Yeah,
on
I'm just wondering, from a consumer perspective, that kind of buying energy at sort of retail price. I mean, what's going to be the easiest and the best way for them to do that? Have you seen some examples of kind of apps that's being developed or middlemen that will help in that process?
Well, if you look for developments and examples in Europe, I think the only real ones you'll find, or the best ones you'll find, are in Finland and Estonia today, because that's the two markets where market-related real-time pricing is already possible today. And then we're seeing different ways on how consumers engage. You can have those going for the purest way of saying, I want to see what the price signal is and I adjust my behavior accordingly. But most people will switch over to an automated approach. For example, saying I have a service provider or my retailer directly controlling, for instance, my heat pump to react smartly to heat up more when power is abundant and cheap, and to reduce the electricity intake when power is expensive. And that's usually quite possible because devices like heat pumps have an integrated storage available anyway. And if you have a well-insulated house, then that is an additional integrated storage for heat, if you will. So that is one example on how to do this. And the consumer buying that can save real money, because in the end of the day, you don't need to pay your retailer to organize hedging for you to make sure that you have flat power prices all the time. Instead, you're taking care of your own hedging and flexibility much more cheaply because you have it integrated in your device. And secondly, you're consuming power when it is cheap, which brings down your bill even further.
So which, obviously we're talking about consumer flexibility and unlocking that. What's the kind of highest value to the energy network that a consumer could, is it EVs or is it rooftop solar? What's the market, the industry kind of thinking, we really want to unlock that particular part of this flexibility?
I think it's the combination of it. So first of all, in the markets, there are different types of flexibility. You can explicitly sell, for instance, balancing capacity, very fast reactions when the system really needs it. Or you can have more regular flexibility, for instance, to balance out the renewables in the system. And all of these will be needed. And in terms of the resource, clearly, the most interesting resources today, especially when we're talking about residential consumers, are the larger resources, such as electric heaters or boilers or heat pumps, as I mentioned. Electric vehicles will become a very interesting resource. For consumers who have it, home storage or a solar system indeed, where the inverter has some smart potentials to react flexibly as well. So these are the key resources we're looking at. But once you're at it and once you're aggregating the consumer's flexibility, of course you can also start considering devices such as freezers, which may not be as intensive consumers of electricity as an electric boiler would be, but they also have a lot of flexibility and can be added into the pool.
Do you have any sense of the scale of home storage adoption at the moment around Europe?
Well, it depends on the country you're looking at. Where you have storage rollout, now I guess we're talking dedicated storage, so battery storage, yes. So where you're having programs for it, dedicated programs, like in Germany, for instance, we see very significant uptake, but that always very much depends on the duration of the program and the approach there. Where we also see an uptake is in countries around the world where power prices tend to be high and where people are increasingly saying, I'm going to reduce my reliance on the system and I'm going to self-generate with solar and buy my battery so that I can become a true prosumer. Now, in some countries this will be extremely interesting. When we're looking at Europe, probably most people would not necessarily go off-grid. And here the challenge is rather, how do we make sure that if people are investing in what we really need for the system, in renewable generation, into storage, into other forms of flexibility by activating their devices, is it actually the right way to push them into autarky? Or shouldn't we find ways to actually encourage them to also use this flexibility for the system's benefit? And here I think we need a major shift in the regulatory approach that we're having today. Because the tendency seems to be today to say, well, the prosumer, they are benefiting from the grid as a buffer, but most of the time they're not participating. So let's make sure that instead of paying, for instance, per kilowatt hour of electricity that they're using the grid for, let's have a capacity-based fee based on the connection size. And this may indeed, the thinking behind this is to say, okay, that way also the solar prosumers will pay their fair share of the grid. Seems obvious, but actually what we're doing with that is to encourage the prosumers who have flexibility in self-generation to try and minimize the size of their connection as much as possible so they pay less for that connection. And what we achieve with that is that instead of using the flexibility that they have for the system and for the benefit of the system, they will use it to optimize their own home system, which can be a good thing as well. And certainly from a technology evolution perspective, it's very helpful that they're doing this. But I think we need to go the next step and make sure that they also can use this flexibility for the benefit of the system.
So is that something you're doing as an association? Are you lobbying the Commission for that kind of regulation and
I
understanding?
Yes. And with many approaches, we are already, when we're talking about the real-time pricing that we mentioned, if consumers get that signal, they can react accordingly. Another dimension that I mentioned is the explicit selling of flexibility, by which basically the consumer can work with an aggregator who looks into the flexibility potentials in the home and sells the flexibility to the market on the consumer's behalf.
Yes, so the aggregator, I mean, that was something we wanted to sort of talk about a bit more. How do you view their importance in this energy transition?
Extremely important. And then to be clear, when we're talking about aggregators, in principle that can be an independent aggregator or it can be the consumer's retailer who can take this aggregator function. However, we believe that in order to get the market going, it's absolutely essential that both independent aggregators and integrated aggregators have the possibility to compete in the market. And if we're looking at examples today, we already see evolution in those countries where independent aggregators are allowed and have the possibility to work, at least in some of the markets. We see very interesting developments. For example, here in Belgium, where we're now, we see water pumping stations or steel manufacturing working with an independent aggregator to activate their flexibilities, sell them to the system, and reduce the need for very expensive backup generation plants, because this flexibility is available in the consumer's premises.
Is there enough of a margin for that aggregator role to grow?
Yes, there is. I mean, in both ways, there is a margin when it comes to the flexibility that there is in the system. The European Commission estimates 160 gigawatts for Europe by 2030. You might even argue that that's on the conservative side. But still, 160 gigawatt is about twice as much as Germany's entire installed fossil power generation capacity. So just to give us an idea about the size there. When it comes to the flexibility needs in the system, generally these can be expected to go up also with the increasing variability of renewables and with the reduction of overcapacity in the system. The challenge today is that right now, flexibility prices tend to be relatively low in Europe, and one of the key reasons for that is that today in many countries we do have a situation of overcapacity. Yeah. So in the near term, yes, the incentive signals could be better.
And would you encourage aggregators to think bigger than local, than servicing one community or one kind of region?
I think they need to think all levels. And when we're looking at today's markets, most aggregators are actually selling at the system level, because that's where they are actually able to sell their flexibility today and valorize their flexibility, for example, by selling to the transmission system operator. In the future, we hope to have an additional local dimension because, and that's another thing that actually the Clean Energy Package introduces, because we believe that with the energy transition, with more and more decentralized electricity generation and resources in general, the local congestion management will continue to play a more important role. And what the package introduces is that also distribution system operators should be encouraged to source flexibility services from the market and make use of them to optimize the system locally as an alternative to investments in networks where the flexibility alternative is more cost effective. And this is clearly a market that aggregators could be serving as well. It's a market that needs to be aligned with the rest of the system so that aggregators can choose at every time where is the flexibility needed most. Do I sell it to the DSO at the moment? Do I sell it to the TSO? Do I sell it to another market party who is off balance? So there needs to be clear alignment and streamlining of the different marketplaces. But in the end of the day, they should all exist and all will be needed.
Interesting times, Frauke.
Yes, they are.
Thank you for joining us. That's all we've got time for. Thank you for watching InnoGrid TV in association with Engerati. You can see our previous interviews with Frauke also on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.